Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice little 8-game Major League Baseball slate for you that starts at 7 o'clock. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? Alright, let's go ahead and get into the slate here. We're going to start with Luis Castillo for Seattle. Now, he's been up and down throughout the season. He does pitch against Minnesota, who he faced his last start and scored 24 fantasy points. That said, I do like some bats in this game, as he has given up 3 earned runs and 6 hits in the last game, and he has some inconsistencies with earned runs, as he's given up quite a few in several games lately. However, he does have good utility in this one and a good enough K rate to be viable. Then we'll look at Yu Darvish for San Diego. He is facing Pittsburgh, which is definitely a positive for him on this particular situation, though he's been very inconsistent this season, as he has had some really good games or some really bad ones, but he has 2 really good games in a row with 27 fantasy points or better. He does feel risky, but the matchup is decent, and that gives him some utility here, though he is a little bit overpriced here. Then we'll look at Berrios for Toronto. Against the Dodgers, this is a very unappealing matchup, but he has been more consistent this season than the two of him and Castillo and Darvish. Though he does feel very high risk in this situation because the Dodgers have a very good offense. That said, even with the rough matchup, his floor is pretty good, as he's only had a few games under 18 fantasy points most of the season, with the exception of pretty early in the year. So overall, I do think he's viable, but he's high risk, high reward. And then we'll look at Logan Allen for Cleveland, as the issue here is that his K rate has been very low for most of the year. Even though he's only given up 3 earned runs or more 4 times, he's only scored over 25 fantasy points 3 times. And with that said, he's not giving up a ton of earned runs, and he's not had an earned run to give up in 3 straight games. But he's also not getting very deep in the game because his pitch count is really high. So as you can see in the last couple of games, he's only gotten 5, 3.2, and 4 innings, and the pitch count has been pretty high. So that is a concern here, but he does draw good metrics for this game regardless, and he's facing a team that's not playing very well at all. Then we'll look at Medea from Minnesota. Now he is facing Seattle. His last game versus Seattle was good, and he had 9 strikeouts, which tied a season high there. But he's just 4 games over 20 fantasy points on the season, and while he has a high floor, his ceiling is very low. So he's high risk, high reward here. And Seattle does have some bats that are interesting. So let's go ahead and get into our bats. So we'll get into our catchers here. Will Smith is hitting the ball extremely well recently. He's got a 341 average over the last 10 games. He's also hit a home run, though I really wish he was hitting more than just one, but he's hitting the ball well, and he's been getting on base in just about every game, so that does give him some really good utility here. William Contreras for Milwaukee is also in play. Now, his batting average has really risen recently, as he's hitting the ball extremely well, though he's still not doing a ton in the fantasy point department, except when he hits a home run. But he's had a few good games, and so he does have some utility here. He doesn't strike out a ton, which gives him some upside as well. As you can tell, he's only had a couple games with a strikeout in him recently, and he's got home run potential. Cal Raleigh is also in play for Seattle, as he's kind of a contrarian play, as he hasn't hit the ball as well as some of the other guys, but he does have home run potential, and so he's kind of a very best play on this particular slate. Then we'll look at first base and Freddie Freeman for the Dodgers, as he has hit the ball extremely well recently with a 447 batting average over the last 10 games. He's had 4 home runs, over that stretch as well, and he's getting just a flurry of hits. He's only had 1 game in the last 5 or 6 that he hasn't scored 10 fantasy points, so he draws really good upside, though he's very expensive and hard to roster as a result. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is also in play, as he hasn't hit the ball as well, but he still has the home run potential, and he's had 3 home runs in the last 4 games, which give him a lot of utility here. He draws a great matchup as well, and he's got all the potential you could want. But a really good cheap play here is Brandon Belt at $3,100. He hasn't hit the ball particularly good this season, but he does have good potential for home runs, and he's hitting the ball pretty solidly in some of the recent games. In fact, I think he's had 4 straight games with hits. So I do think he's drawing some good metrics, and he has a good upside here. Nate Lowe is also in play for Texas. Now, he does draw a good game here against Houston's pitching, but he's hitting extremely well with a 400 batting average over the last 10 games. He's a little underpriced due to the fact that he's hitting the ball so well. He does have some home run upside today as well, but he's a little bit risky on that one. Alex Kirilloff for Minnesota is in play. Now he's under $3,000, which does give him some utility here. But he is facing a pitcher that's the most expensive on the slate and has some good utility as well. That said, he does have good metrics, and his batting average has been really solid recently. And he's also had some really good games against Seattle this season already, so I do think he draws some good metrics here. Moving to second base, we're going to look at Simeon for the Texas Rangers. He's a little bit overpriced here. Sorry, he's a little bit overpriced here, but he does draw some good metrics here, and he's hitting the ball decently well with home run potential on the slate. Brendan Donovan is a very cheap option here for St. Louis at second base. Now, he's not a huge home run threat most of the time, but he has been hitting some home runs recently. The batting average could be better, but he has managed to score fantasy points. And while he's taken off a few games lately, he does draw some potential here. I do think he's a core play on the slate, but that may be subject to change depending on how this lineups look later. Nolan Gorman is also in play if he does draw the start, but I don't think he will likely, as though he has hit the ball extremely well lately with 324 average over the last 10 games and 3 home runs. He has more home run upside than Donovan does if he plays, but he is day to day, so do keep that in mind. Then we'll look at Julian for second base against Seattle. Now he has hit the ball extremely well lately. With 3 home runs in the last 10 games. He's just absolutely mashing the ball, and he has really good potential here, though he does feel a little bit risky as he has had some really bad games as well. But overall, he's a pretty cheap option, so he's definitely viable here. Jose Ramirez is in play for Cleveland. Now, I do like Cleveland today, but there is some discrepancy on which guy is going to be the starting pitcher for Kansas City, so do keep that in mind. But overall, it doesn't really matter too much who they catch or who's hitting there. Sorry, who's pitching for Kansas City. Cleveland's got some good bats in this game, and Jose Ramirez is hitting the ball very well. Even without the home runs, he's managed to score some good fantasy points. Then we'll look at Machado for San Diego. Now, he seems like he's really been in a slump, but he's been in a boom or bust slump. So he's really not doing much when he doesn't get home runs, but when he does, then he's a great play. So he's high risk, high reward from that perspective. Then we'll look at Garcia for Kansas City here against Allen from Cleveland. He's been a little bit inconsistent throughout the season. He doesn't have a lot of home runs upside, but he does have some pretty decent hitting upside. And he's had 4 straight games with good hitting, including 2 hit games. Though the fantasy points do need to be a little bit better than they have been, he is cheap enough and has some good utility here. Then we'll look at Candelario for Washington. Now, I do like Washington today, though he does seem a little bit risky as he's not hit the ball very well, but he still managed to get some home runs, which gives him some upside and utility here. Then we'll look at shortstop, and Bo Bichette is in play for Toronto as he draws good metrics. He's got some interesting upside, though he hasn't hit the ball particularly well lately. He does have a good average on the season, and it's just a matter of time before he gets out of the slump and starts going again and having a big game. Then we'll look at Willy Adames. Let's see, where'd he go? For Milwaukee. Now, I do like Milwaukee's stack today, though they are a little bit pricey on this particular slate, and he's no exception to that, as he's hitting the ball pretty much inconsistent throughout the season, but he does have some hits in the last few games, and he does have home run potential, which he does at a pretty good rate. So if you utilize him, then you're pretty much trying to get a home run out of it. Rosario for Cleveland is also in play. Now, he is $4,200. He has also, his batting average has really suffered recently, but he has managed to get a lot of hits, and so if he can string together a couple for this game, he'll have some utility on this particular slate. Then we'll look at outfielders. We're going to start with Corbin Carroll here. He is a core play for me for Arizona. Sorry. He is hitting the ball pretty well. He ended up hitting a home run in 3 of the last 4 games, and he's got really good metrics, though he's no longer in Cincinnati. He's still facing very terrible pitching for St. Louis, and he draws really good metrics here as a result. I really do like the Arizona stack today. Kyle Tucker also in play. He is very expensive as well, but he's hitting the ball very good. Almost a 400 average over the last 10, including 4 home runs. And he's managed to score fantasy points pretty much every game and having a bunch of really good games. So I really like his upside. Juan Soto is in play for San Diego as he draws good metrics for this game. He's been a little bit inconsistent from the batting average perspective, but he does draw home run upside, and that's why I like him here, especially against a pitcher that's not done all that great this season. Tatis Jr. is also in play for San Diego. He's not hit the ball nearly as well as Soto has, but he does draw some good metrics and is a contrarian play, though he's very expensive and very hard to roster as a result. Then we'll look at George Springer for Toronto. Now, I do like his upside. I think a Toronto stack is not bad either, though he doesn't have the batting average that we'd really like, especially with only 1 home run in the last 10 games. But he does draw some utility here, and he is managing to get on base and do things, especially getting walked, so that's a good sign. At some point, he'll break out. Then we'll look at Lane Thomas for Washington. He's hitting the ball pretty solidly throughout the season. He's been a little bit of a fluke recently, but it seems like maybe he's starting to come out of that as he's had 3 straight games with very good fantasy point output, and so I do like his potential here. And he's also got some low-end stolen base potential as well, which he has managed to get 4 yesterday. So then we'll look at Lars Nootbaar for St. Louis. Now, if he does draw the start today, he'll be in play. If not, then obviously I would avoid him. He has hit the ball decently well and has really good metrics for this game, but he's high risk, high reward. Dalton Varsho has been very bad this season. Very inconsistent recently, especially, but he is kind of a boom or bust play, and he hasn't boomed in a few games, so hopefully he can have a big game here and be viable, but he is high risk, high reward as a result of that situation. But if you go with the Toronto stack, he's definitely somebody you can utilize. Then we'll look at Tyler O'Neill for St. Louis. Now, he draws some interesting metrics for this game. He has some really good upside. He hasn't hit the ball very well, though, and so that gives him some concern. But he definitely has 2 games over the last 4 over 10 fantasy points, and that gives him some opportunity here. Then we're going to look at Jake McCarthy for Arizona. I really do like Arizona stacks, as I mentioned, and he is nice and cheap. Though his batting average isn't great, and he doesn't really have a ton of home run upside, he's got good upside for just getting good hits and stealing bases. So I think he draws some metrics here, even if it's not in the most conventional fashion. And then we'll look finally at Alek Thomas for Arizona. He also draws some good metrics here for Arizona, and he has a little bit more home run upside than McCarthy does, and he's a little bit cheaper, but he also has the more propensity to strike out and not score any fantasy points. So with that said, let's get into some sub 3,000 players first real quick. I'm just going to rattle off these. Alex Kirilloff from Minnesota is first base. Alek Thomas, Arizona for outfield. J.P. Crawford of $3,000. Seattle at shortstop. Stone Garrett for Washington the outfield, $2,900. For $2,300, Darren Blanco for Kansas City outfield. Max Kepler, $2,900, Minnesota outfield. Alejandro Kirk, $2,900 for Toronto catcher. That's kind of a sneaky good catcher today. Josh Bell, $3,000 for Cleveland. He's an interesting option at first base today as well. Sal Frederick of Milwaukee in the outfield. He had a breakout game yesterday, and if he can continue to play well, then he'll be viable going forward. David Fry for Cleveland is also available as a catcher or outfield, and he can fit in wherever you want him. And then Will Benson for Cincinnati has some utility as a $3,000 guy in the outfield in Cincinnati. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and I'm going to state it.